Gentlemen, we will now begin the meeting of Rules and Government Committee of the Los Angeles City Council. I'm Councilmember Eric Garcetti, joined by my colleague and friend, Mr. Dennis P. Zine, and we have a short agenda, but not necessarily a short meeting. So thank you, everybody who's come and taken the time out of your day to be here. We very much appreciate your presence, and we'll see if there's any general public comment. Anybody? If not, not having to do with number one. So just of a general nature, not having to do with the item on the agenda? Okay. We have both public comment for item one and then general public comment, which is for items not on the agenda. So we'll open and close our general public comment. With that, let's take up item one.
Item one is a city administrative officer report relative to costs for instant runoff voting and vote by mail. A communication from the City Ethics Commission has been received following release of the agenda, and that will be considered in the action today as well.
Okay. All right. I see our colleague, Mr. Huizar. I'd like to also afford him the, I think we might do, why don't we do the presentation, but Mr. Huizar, if you want to come and say a few words just before, I want to give you that courtesy because I know you have a busy day. So why don't you come forward and then we'll hear the report and then we'll do our general our comments from the public.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and Chairman. What should I call it, Mr. President or Chair? You're President no matter if you're chairing a
Council
committee.
member, whatever.
Thank you, Eric.
Just call me Eric.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to simply come by yet again when this item was heard in this committee to give my support to instant runoff voting system here in Los Angeles. I have before me in my notes a number of data that shows why we should do this. I will, and I'm sure you probably have that information somewhere in your notes, but as we know, IRV will not only save us money, increase voter turnout, but one of the issues that is dear and near to my heart is how this will impact minority voting patterns. And in San Francisco, I did want to point out one important factor is that in San Francisco, Latino and African American voters reported that they understood the system at rates similar to others, and we know how important it is to make sure that it does not inadvertently affect these voters. I wanted also as well to take this time to point out one particular instance that made me a full supporter of instant runoff voter, and that is when we had a community college runoff not too long ago, where community college board of trustees have all brought to my attention how much it cost them, and also we had some expenses. But I remember going to my voting booth about a little after the afternoon, and I asked how many people had gone to vote. They said I was the fourth one, and that the one other person who had voted that day was my wife. So as you can see,
half of the precinct.
Half of the precinct.
Household.
So as you can see, this is something that it's time we look at this. I know there's been some discussion as to whether we do this or make a proposal for November or March. I would say that I haven't heard any compelling reason why not to do it in November, but I do think that we are in a much better position now than we were a few months ago when we heard this item in this committee. I hope that with the information we have now received, we could ask ourselves or propose something to start moving in a direction that will give us a outline or a timeline about how we would want to implement that. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. I don't want to press on you any particular timeline. I know you have some thoughts on that as well, but hopefully we could come out of this knowing what we will do to start looking in this direction. It's very important, not only financially, but to improve our voting options that we have for our constituents.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Huizar, for your leadership on this issue, too. We very much appreciate the good work you've done. All right, let's hear the report, and then we'll start to the public.
Thank you. Tyler Munhall with the CAO. We were asked to report by council on the costs and savings associated with instant runoff voting and or vote by mail centered elections, including the costs for equipment, software, and an educational campaign. There were 4 scenarios presented, 2 of which focused on using them in runoff or special elections, and 2 that focus on doing it in all elections. And as we know, the city clerk is about to release an RFP for voting equipment, and proposals from vendors are expected to come in around October, at which point we will be in a much better position to provide you data on equipment costs, software costs, that sort of thing. The primary cost factors, however, that we can look at right now that we've identified are, of course, the type of equipment that's purchased. Electronic equipment will be more expensive than mechanical equipment, and the amount of equipment that will be purchased. In a vote-by-mail centered election, there would be less equipment purchased. However, it might be more expensive electronic equipment. But the primary cost factor will be whether or not we procure equipment with the county. Policy discussions need to happen on this side as well as on the county side to determine whether or not we'll be able to procure with the county. The city clerk's RFP is being designed so that the county can participate if that gets resolved. The city clerk's vote-by-mail centered election recommended 100 voting centers to allow people who want to go to a polling place or who need assistance in voting a place to go. That voting centers will have a cost associated with them that will offset some of the potential savings from moving to vote by mail. The educational campaign, the model has been San Francisco's, which for IRV, which costs $1.70 per voter. If that were done in, if the same thing costs were done in Los Angeles, it'd be $3.4 million approximately. There are factors that are unique to Los Angeles. The size, we're 10 times larger. The number of languages that we have to translate materials into, and just simply the complexity of Los Angeles will have an impact on the educational campaign. So, bottom line, our recommendation was to continue.
How many languages we have right now? 7?
I'm sorry?
7 languages?
7, and I'll defer to the city clerk, but I believe it's 7 plus English.
7 plus English.
6 plus.
6 plus English.
6 plus English.
English, Spanish. Let's see if we can name them real quick. It's English, Spanish,
I can do it.
Chinese. Well, Mandarin, right? Tagalog, Korean. We have not Farsi.
Japanese.
Japanese, Vietnamese.
Vietnamese, yeah, I think you got them.
Yeah, that's 7. Okay, there we go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
A few more. Yeah.
And soon Arabic. Don't worry, Mr. Stein.
I had several nightmares of trying to figure out the difference between our 6 and their 2.
Gotcha. Okay.
Just bottom line, our recommendation is that the costs and our savings associated with different styles of voting be continued until we get proposals from the RFP, where we'll be able to give you much better information, and that the policy discussion about the impact on the electorate and the voting process, that continue. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. Would our city clerk like to add her thoughts?
No, actually, I think Mr. Munhall did a good job of summarizing their report, and we provided a report several months ago, and I don't think we have anything more to add to that at this point.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we take public comment, and then we will invite you back, and we'll have some discussion as well. Our first speaker is Danielle Garcia, and then after that is, I didn't even see you out there, the Honorable Jackie Goldberg. Nice to see you. Okay, come, Mr. Garcia. And then we'll hear from the Honorable Jackie Goldberg next.
I prepared a letter for you, and you got it in the voting, and it states the following. I'm Daniel Garcia, system change advocate from Community Rehabilitation Services. We represent consumers with disability in East Los Angeles and San Gabriel area. At the time when the city of LA is running $400 million in deficit, IRB will say that LA taxpayers $8 million to $9 million every local election. For the 2007 LA CCD, runoff alone. $5.5 million that were wasted on an election where only 6% of voters show up. The east side of society communities with disabilities are concerned about their votes not being counted accurate and fast enough that the IRB is needed. This community would rather see their tax city dollars in the hand of their constituents and programs that the city will start providing welfare for their community rather than being spent on politicians slinging at each other. We appreciate the kind of leadership that you have demonstrated. It is our best wishes that you continue to fight for the people who you represent and care. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Garcia. Appreciate your testimony. Jackie, give it to the CLA here. We'll make sure we have put that in the record. Thank you. And good to see you again. Sorry I missed you this weekend.
It's all right.
There was another Jackie Goldberg who showed up after you. You have a doppelganger. Like, literally, that's her name.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Oh, well, that's nice. I hope she gets a lot of my bills. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I came to support the idea of asking you to take some action to put this on the ballot and to ask, therefore, the city attorney's office to get the language prepared. I think the IRV has been an outstanding success everywhere it's been. And I don't mean just as a savings of money, because while obviously we've always worry about that, I think there are much more important things at stake. I think the fact that it reduces the hostility in elections, at least in the places where it exists, is something to me that means more than even saving money. Because people, I know that I've tried to encourage to run for office in an environment of term limits. Their basic reason for saying they wouldn't be willing to do it is they don't want to go through what all of us have gone through. And they don't mean just good questions and tough questions. They mean the mudslinging and the crapola. Turns out that in the places where there's IRV, people who are trying to get you to pick them first or second behave much better, because they want to appeal not only to their own base, but to other people's base so that they can get that second or third vote. I think that's really important. The other reason I support it strongly is that I think that the amount of money that city council elections now cost compared to when I ran, not that many years ago, is just staggering. And to do that twice, when generally speaking, and I've looked now at a lot of the results from the last 4 or 5 cycles, were predictable. Someone got 46, 45, 48%. We knew who was going to win. Didn't matter. And then you have another huge fundraising. You've got another huge mudslinging, because now that person who's coming from maybe 18 or 19% in a crowd, that person now has every reason to go mudslinging, because they have to dissuade people who've already voted for you once to even have a prayer. And I think this will make our elections more enticing and will get greater participation from the public.
Okay, thank you very much. Always good to see you. Good to have you here. Thank you, Jackie. Tad Daly is our next speaker. And it is always a pleasure to see Tad as well. So, welcome.
Hello, Council Members Ein, Mr. President. Tad Daly is my name. I'm a former foreign policy advisor to Diane Watson and Dennis Kucinich and the late great Senator Alan Cranston. I'm currently with an anti-nuclear group called International Physicians Preventing Nuclear War, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. And I'm not an electoral reform specialist. As you know, Eric, nuclear disarmament is my main racket. But I wanted to quickly tell you about 2 elections where I think Irv would have made an enormous difference. One is the just recently completed Ridley Thomas versus Parks race. And actually I wrote a piece about that appeared on both Common Dreams and Huffington Post, just making the case that had Irv existed there, it would have been very much a win-win for everybody. So I'd like to give you a copy of that.
Absolutely.
The other election I'd like to tell you about is my own. As I know you remember, Mr. President, I ran for Congress just once, This is when Julian Dixon suddenly died in December of 2000. They called a special for April of 2001, and 16 candidates jumped in the race. 3 of them were political veterans with real political operations: Diane Watson, the eventual winner, Kevin Murray, and Nate Holden. And the other 13 were like me, political long shots, political newcomers who had ideas. I had some very innovative and important ideas. I talked about doing something serious about AIDS in Africa. I talked about integrating nuclear nonproliferation with nuclear disarmament. I talked about a standing UN rapid deployment force that could go in and end genocide. And I'm out there in community forums, and I'm out there going door to door, and voter after voter said to me, I love those ideas. I really want to support those ideas, but I don't want to waste my vote. Because they knew that the winner was going to be one of those 3 political veterans. IRV would give voters the opportunity to both express support for innovative ideas like the ones I and many others advance, ideas that are ahead of their time, and also be able to participate directly in the outcome of the election at hand. It's a win-win for everybody, and I think is crucial to no less than the fate of our civilization, getting those ideas out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Ted. Linda Sutton is our next speaker.
Over here.
Hi, I'm Linda Sutton, and I'm here to speak for Progressive Democrats of Los Angeles, which is one of the early endorsers for the instant runoff voting, as well as myself as a member of Councilman Zine's district. I strongly believe that this has to be something that we move to for all of the reasons that the first 2 speakers have said. This is financially something the city needs, but for our democracy, this is something that this city needs. And I'm sorry to see that, it had to be San Francisco first and not Los Angeles first.
Right. They
But
test all sorts of things.
it's okay for us to do it, but I think we need to really, put aside the continuation of this and continuing and studies and like this and get it done. Get it on the ballot for November, get it out there, have people vote on it. If it is out there and voted on, then the CAO and all the other people along the way will come along, as will the county. But I would hate to see this thing get kind of just continue to be moved along, passed along and nothing done with it. I mean, we need this now. If our budget is in as bad shape as everybody keeps saying it is, then there is absolutely no reason from a financial standpoint that it shouldn't be done now. I'm moving very quickly toward the senior citizen zone in my life, and frankly, I'm appalled at the kind of regressive taxation that's been put on the lower income level people, of which I, as a teacher, consider myself, because every month I see something more added onto my bills, some kind of city fee, which is a tax, and the idea that this thing that is such a no-brainer, it's something that totally should be done, and we look to you as our leader in our city, as the person that should be moving this forward, sponsoring it, getting it out there.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Gautam Dutta is our next speaker. After that is Reynold Blight.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm Gautam Dutta from New America Foundation. In just a few months, IRV has done the seemingly impossible. It has brought together virtually all of Los Angeles. When's the last time the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce and the County Federation of Labor actually agreed on something? Well, they simply do agree here, and it's no accident. Why is everyone supporting IRV? For one thing, it'll save LA taxpayers $8 to $9 million, this at a time when the city's facing a $406-some million deficit. It'll also relieve voter fatigue. As Councilmember Weissar mentioned, we had an election last year where only 6% showed up, and in some precincts, actually no one showed up. Everyone was voting by mail. That was very disheartening. We also wanted to supplement the CAO's report with a few additional facts. As the report accurately noted, the city will be required to buy new voting equipment after the 2009 city election. However, we don't need to wait until the conclusion of the RFP process to estimate the costs. The city clerk has already done so and provided a detailed estimate in her comprehensive report. What's more, if the city partners with the county, there may be county funds available from HAVA, that's the Help America Vote Act, and Prop 41 to pay for the entire cost. of the equipment. Today, we ask the Rules Committee and the full City Council to do its part. IRV is a reform whose time has come, and now is the time for the voters to decide whether or not it's good for Los Angeles. So we ask Rules to put IRV and to basically put it on the agenda to go to a for the November ballot, and we ask for the City Council, the full City Council, to take action by July 2nd, so it can be put on the ballot for voters to decide.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Reynold Blight is next. After that is Peter Totham.
Good afternoon. I'm Reynold Blight, former chair of the Greater Toluca Lake Neighborhood Council and still a member. I wanted to come down this afternoon and let you know that our neighborhood council considered this and unanimously supported it. And our council would be happy to help with any kind of education out in the community to tell people how to vote, how this all works. In addition, I wanted to share some of my personal experience because we've had voting at my home for almost 10 years. Every election, people come through, and general elections like what's coming up in November are always fun. I mean, it's a neighborhood coming together, everybody's seeing each other and all of that. The city runoff elections, on the other hand, are really tedious. You have people who go in, they take training from the county or the city. They come out at 6 in the morning to help set up. They open the doors at 7 o'clock. No one shows up, or very few people show up, even in our precinct, which has a pretty good record of people showing up. At the end of the day, we might have 20 people, 25 people who actually walk through, and that's a long day for precinct workers, and even with the little pay that they get, it's really a waste of money to have these runoffs with all of the paraphernalia, all the process of an election with so few participants. It's just a real waste. So I wanted to give that to you in person.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here, and thank you for your testimony. Peter, come on. And Mona Field will be our next speaker after that. Sorry, it looked like a U earlier today because the O hadn't come all the way around. So my apologies.
I understand. Hopefully it won't happen again.
No, we got it looked like an O.
So a lot of the points I was going to make have been eloquently expressed. There are three things I'd like to go into that I think hopefully will give my personal assessment of why it's so important for the council to move forward on this and quickly. When I was at Yale, I took a class in political science with a professor named David Swanson, and we looked at the European parliamentary systems and then the American system of democracy. There's a famous book called Economic Theory of Democracy by Anthony Downs. And I looked at the two-party system, the binary sort of decision-making process. And IRV stood out. We did an exhaustive review of something like 8 different types of voting systems. And the extraordinary thing about IRV, and the reason it trumped all of these other different political systems, was that it forced people to think about this full spectrum of options that they had, to weigh the statistical probabilities, to have a dialogue, to think beyond just sort of a yes-no binary framework. And it really had a meaningful difference in terms of the end results. So I think there's a genuine sort of full spectrum relevance that IRV creates with respect to the voters' perceptions, their consciousness, and it would be a real leap forward in terms of the types of politics that we have in this country and certainly in the city. The other two anecdotes are more personal. I worked on Mark Ridley Thomas's campaign, and Tad talked about that election. The city of Los Angeles, as people have noted, is $410 million plus in the hole, and IRV would have saved $10 million plus on that campaign by itself. Those cost savings are necessary. It's something that we have to look into and address. And I think IRV is a step in that direction. The last point I'll make is that voter turnout has declined significantly. We're now at 6 to 16%. People have talked about that. Mark Ridley Thomas's campaign, it was 16%. I think IRV will galvanize the electorate, get people to be much more engaged by politics, and create that dialogue and increase that voter participation rate. So please,
Thank you.
Please move forward on it. Thanks.
And just one mild correction, I wish it would have saved us that much, but it's a county election, so it couldn't have saved the city, unfortunately, any money. But in a city year, it could have.
Okay.
Yeah. Mona Field. Nice to see you as well. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. I was so pleased when I found out the committee was discussing this today. And I'm here, my name is Mona Field, and I'm on the board of the Los Angeles Community College District. And a little reminder, of course, that in addition to changing the city's election structure, this change through the city charter would change it for the LAUSD and LACCD. So the combined jurisdictions are going to save millions. And I understand there were two items that I think I understood from your report. One was that it doesn't save the city that much, and I think I saw a number like $1 or $2 million per year, and I thought, I think our city could use those millions for our parks and our streets and our tree trimming and our police. I mean, I think we should save every taxpayer dollar we can. And so I was a little concerned that it was, I thought I read it as if it's not enough to go through the trouble of making change. And of course, change can be challenging. But in this case, I think the change is very worthwhile because all three jurisdictions will benefit. And I believe you've heard the many reasons that both voters and candidates will benefit from instant runoff voting. One other thing that I thought I saw there was a concern about the cost of the education involved in re-educating voters to a new way of approaching the ballot. And I think we have to remember that the bulk of those costs are one time, perhaps a little bit of repetition in the second election cycle, but once people learn a new way, they learn it, and it gets passed on, and we don't really need to think of that as an ongoing cost. And I might add that the Los Angeles Community College District does specialize in educating people over 18, and I suspect we would want to work with the city closely on the process of educating voters about a new way to look at the ballot and make choices. And I would really urge that the committee recommend to the council action for November and let our voters choose whether this method indeed serves our city and our school and college district. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mona. Great to see you. Vanessa Rodriguez is our next speaker. And as she comes up, I think one of the earlier voters said it was, speakers, excuse me, said it was rare that the County Federation and the Chamber of Commerce agreed, but I think the last 3 or 4 ballot measures I looked at, the Prop R, which Prop H, Prop 1, which was statewide, so
we like to
good to see the tradition continue.
Progressive. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for hosting this committee meeting. Vanessa Rodriguez with the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here in support of IRV. And I've also entered letters from Gary Tobin, who could not make it this afternoon, into the public record for your convenience. And as most of you know, last month, the LA Chamber's Board of Directors unanimously voted to endorse placing IRV on the November 2008 ballot. The board endorsed IRV because it has a historic track record of saving taxpayer money, creating a more positive campaign environment, and increasing voter participation. San Francisco's experience with IRV has been very positive. Oakland, Minneapolis, and other jurisdictions adopted IRV with overwhelming approval by voters, and they are on track to successfully implement the program within the expected 2 to 4 year transition period. Here in Los Angeles, the city is required by state law to invest in new voting equipment. This is the perfect opportunity to also invest in a better way to conduct local elections. We therefore encourage you to place IRV on the November ballot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Our next speaker is David Holtzman.
Oh, really?
And after that will be Stephen Ochoa. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm David Holtzman with Los Angeles Voters for Instant Runoff Elections. I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles and on the board of West Los Angeles Neighborhood Council. I remember when the chairman of this committee enthusiastically endorsed instant runoff voting, there were handshakes and smiles and kisses even all around. I remember when my city councilman endorsed instant runoff election, there was much declaiming about the importance of the cause. So I'm just wondering what the holdup is now. Wondering why I had to take some time off from my now full-time job as an environmental consultant to come here and talk about it once again. I'm looking forward to finally seeing a specific proposal on the table about this. As an environmental consultant, I know that there are situations in which there's a goal established without the specific mechanisms for reaching that goal fully in place. For instance, AB 32 says we're going to roll back our greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020. They don't have all the control measures in place. You don't need that. Analogously, you don't need to have the voting equipment available right now, which I think is one of the holdups, to be able to move forward with instant runoff voting, put it on the charter as a mandate and a goal to start in 2011. You can do it now. We, as a city, our city elections are not subject to federal law. As a charter city, if we put it in our charter, we don't even have to be subject to state regulations of election equipment. So that can save a lot of money for the vendors and development costs in developing the new equipment. So keep that in mind. I mean, you could just put in the proposal that if you want a paper trail set, you could say that the city will use IRV for its elections on equipment that satisfies the paper trail requirement, X section of the election code as specified in statute passed then, and otherwise selected by the city clerk. Just let the city clerk select the equipment. I'll just finally say, as a member of the West LA Neighborhood Council, I saw where there's no community impact statement submitted, but the West LA Neighborhood Council did vote unanimously to endorse IRV.
We'll consider it part of the record.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen Ochoa, and one more public speaker card, and then we'll have you, Mr. Rosendahl, come forward as well.
Hello, members of the committee, Councilman Garcetti, Councilman Zine. Nice to see you guys again. I'm Stephen Ochoa, representing the William C. Velasquez Institute, and I've had the pleasure of speaking before you earlier, and I'm glad to be here again to once again just announce that the Institute is in full support of the IRV concept. As a organization that is committed to improving the empowerment of the Latino community, this is a concept that will truly make the Latino vote more efficient. By condensing into one election season, it makes the Latino vote efficient. You have multiple candidates going. If the first choice isn't there, our second choice is there. It truly will help help Latinos and all persons choose their candidate of choice. The truncated election season will help make your jobs more efficient. I know our community would be better served by you being in council rather than necessarily being an extended campaign season. The cost efficiencies have been mentioned. The system saves money, and that money, frankly, can be used to other election aids and reforms. There's still campaign finance reform out there. There's just the simple fact of you're still going to need some voter education campaigns when you on the first switch. And quite frankly, this is going to be a boon to organizations like my sister organization, Southwest Voter Registration, any group that concentrates on just getting out the vote. Imagine how much easier it is for grassroots organizers to get out the vote to their various communities across the city if they just have to concentrate on one election rather than, say, two. There are just dozens of benefits to this system for the minority community, in our opinion, and we certainly urge you to put this on the November ballot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Francis Talbot White, and then we'll hear from Councilmember Rosendahl.
I'm Frances Talbot White from League of Women Voters of Los Angeles, and it's no news to you, I think, that the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles has joined with the League of Women Voters of Pasadena and the League of Women Voters of San Francisco to take a position in favor of instant runoff voting. We're also standing by to help with voter education and whatever happens here. But really, I'm here to ask a question, and that is, maybe I missed something, but why aren't we talking about vote by mail also? If there's some logic to waiting for the RFP about instant runoff voting, it seems like there would be less logic in waiting to vote on vote by mail until the RFP comes out.
Okay, well, I'll make sure I'll address it. Do you want to say anything else in the last minute?
That's, I'll yield the remainder of my
Great.
time.
Thank you, Francis. Appreciate it. Councilmember Rosendahl, it's always a pleasure to have you in committee as well. Thank you for making time to come here.
Thank you. I did leave transportation earlier than I wanted to do this. But first, I want to thank the two of you for being here as a committee. I appreciate that very much. To me, there's several issues here to look at. First is let the voters decide. It isn't good, bad, or indifferent. Let the voters make that decision. That's why I urge you to waive it from committees, put it forward, and get it on the November ballot. We're going to have the largest turnout in the history of America this November. There will be young people voting for the first time who've never voted before. There'll be all kinds of ethnic diversity. It's going to be a wave of involvement. And that wave of involvement could capture this issue as well. I think the League of Women Voters and their great campaign of outreach, of educating people, will play a role in this, and elected officials should take their responsibility seriously to help people understand what the ballot measure is, why they should vote for it or why they should vote against it. But let the people make that decision. I frankly don't want to do it in an off election, though I've been wrestling with that issue, because we don't have people in off elections. And if I had my druthers, all elections would be on the even years, including our city, rather than a ridiculous sidebar on these off years. But we're not there yet. Unfortunately, I'm there, and I would love to be able to vote every 2 years instead of this laborious activity of no turnout in our off-year elections, and we should get to that point someday. But I don't want to confuse issues here today. Today, I want to appeal to my colleagues to waive it, get it out of committee, get it on the ballot, since we have the parcel tax for gangs that's going to eat up money. This is a couple $100,000. I know it's 200,000, but it's well worth it to let such a diversity can even bring the presidential candidates and others into the issue of what election reform could be about in this new millennium. Be it same-day registration and voting, which is something I believe in, be it instant runoff voting like this, which is reform, but it would be a healthy discussion in the democracy for our people to participate in it. So we don't even have to say, oh, I like it or not like it. Let the people have that dialogue and discussion. So I appeal to my colleagues here to get it out of committee, get it before the council, and get it on the November ballot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for making the time, Councilman Rosendahl. That will close the public comment. If I can ask the CEO to return to the table to plow through some of the stuff. Let me just say a couple things. First of all, I appreciate the number of people who came here, and friends and predecessors and colleagues and others who are a part of this. And there's a number of different issues that folks brought up, and I think I just wanted to start with responding to one question about what's taking so long. I think when the rubber hits the road, the decisions in the legislative process is to actually cost things out. It's to figure this out. It's to actually figure out, and I have said it publicly before, and I'll say it again, that I'm a supporter of IRV. I do believe in it for the same reasons that people have said here today. But I think we have a responsibility to make sure, as any legislative body does, that we take into account not only long-term savings, but short-term costs and all the things in a difficult budget year and all the other things that are before us. So that's what this meeting is for. We're not waiving anything out. We're actually having the hearing here today, and we have scheduled a placeholder for Friday to bring it to the full council as well, because I think it's very important for everybody to hear and to have that debate in the full council, and have all council members have to say, where are they? Because I don't think we've had clarity across the council where people are. The timing is one of the issues to resolve, and that's one of the things we're going to plow through as well today. But that was just in response to that one point that was made, because I think it's a very important one that, there are political considerations about, and we can all have differences of opinions of, is November the best, is another year the best, just as we have differences of opinions about how to revitalize democracy. We've discussed not only vote by mail, but also in the city clerk's report that was an exhaustive report, and if you haven't read it, I'm sure almost everybody in this room has, but it looked at even number years, for instance, and you've got a trade-off. You've got higher turnout, but you also have city elections being buried under much more expensive media in those years. People can't communicate with folks, and also being the 60th thing on the ballot means that there's a lot of focus on presidential, a lot of focus on gubernatorial, but not as much focus on a mayor's race, for instance, which traditionally does have a very high turnout. Council races are tougher when they're on their own, and we know that for a variety of reasons. But the 2001 election, for instance, was one of the highest turnout elections we've had in many years, and that was, I think, in some ways because it was on a separate year. Other people say put it on an even year, and I've certainly heard the strength of those arguments. We're not resolving that here today, as Mr. Rosendahl said, but I do appreciate, Francis, your point about vote by mail, because these things are intertwined. If we make a commitment in a certain direction towards the equipment and things that we do, the city clerk had kind of, I think, in many ways recommended perhaps a more vigorous vote by mail process of moving forward. We've seen that be a good thing for turnout in places like Oregon, and that doesn't necessarily, could move hand in hand with IRV. They're not mutually exclusive by any set of circumstances, but it also affects the decisions we make in a very compressed time period right now for the equipment, et cetera, and the mechanism of doing that in trying to get the communication out for people so that nobody is disenfranchised. Because I think, first and foremost, we all feel very strongly about this in this room, that while we recognize there are better ways to practice democracy, we also know that in changing ways, there's a lot of people who can, in that moment of the transition, if we're not very good about it, get left behind. And that's the last thing that we want to see happen. So let's go through a couple of the things that have been brought up, and I'll turn it over as well to my colleague, Mr. Zine, after a first set of questions about this as well. I think one of the frustrations I heard articulated was we haven't been able to get a true good cost. What's your sense, and we've had some of these conversations privately, so forgive me if we're going over ground that we've talked about before, but what are some of the issues on the cost side, both in the short term and the long term? I think I haven't read anything that says long term this can't be a money saver, and that's a good thing. And as former Assemblymember Goldberg mentioned, that is not a reason not to do something. I'm not primarily driven by money here. It's a good consideration this year, but let's start there nevertheless. And if you can walk us through a little bit of what those cost savings could be, also what some of the possible costs up front could be as well in getting to savings, both with. And the CAO, feel free to jump in. You don't have to agree, because I know on, for instance, getting the word out on a publicity campaign on this, there might be some different estimations that at least I've heard from you. But why don't you start first, Ms. Calfine?
Sure. With regard to the cost, we provided some estimates in the initial report that we had provided, and of course those are just estimates. We really don't know what we're going to get. We are preparing a request for proposals that we're going to be putting out very soon. We'll have better cost information once we have that. Things that could impact it are just the sheer size of our jurisdiction, the number of languages we're dealing with. There are a whole host of issues, the speed in which we want to count ballots, and so once we get bids back, we'll have an idea of what the system would cost. We're designing the RFP to include different modules so that we could have an instant runoff voting component to it. We could have something that where possibly a vote by mail centered election would be part of it. I do want to just correct a couple things that were said, and that has to do with we do have to follow federal law in conducting our elections, and we do have to have a state certified system. In fact, the systems that are used for voting go through a federal certification and then a state certification, and we do have to have the state certification.
Thank you. I thought that as well, but I appreciate you.
Right. So even if we go in this direction, our ability to implement it will depend on whether we have a certified system to use. Other cost factors, there's no question that if you don't have a runoff, we're going to be saving that money. There would be an initial outlay of money to purchase the system.
We have an initial outlay no matter what coming up to some degree, right?
To some degree, and that also depends on whether we're going to be partnering with the county on an election system. If we partner with the county, there'll be some savings because we'll be a partner in that purchase. They have available to them the federal and state funds for purchase. We don't have that available to us. So if we went completely on our own, we'd be paying for the system separately. And we do recoup the cost, part of the cost of that in several election cycles. So you wouldn't see the savings right off the bat. It would be somewhere down the line, and it would depend a lot about what kind of system we get, how much those are going to cost. So there are a number.
We have to buy new systems no matter what with RFP.
We're moving towards purchasing a new system, either separately or partnering with the county. That's where we're heading.
And your sense, I met with the county registrar recorder as well recently, but can you articulate for everybody what your sense in those conversations with Dean Logan have been in terms of whether they'd be willing to partner? Obviously, that's pretty critical to a lot of things that we might do, and our special elections often come up, and we place those on county run elections. So we would not want to find ourselves in a situation where we're running them, they don't do them or have the equipment to do so, and we have to figure out how to do something in between.
Right. If, what we're working with them, and we're going to be incorporating what their requirements might be into the RFP, so that we leave that option open to partner. They could maybe, if depending on what we purchase, they might jump on with us, or, they may be looking at different things, and we'll be open to their, looking at what they're doing as well. But if we're doing elections one way and they're doing elections another way, that's going to be an impact on voters. If we can do, like, for example, instant runoff voting for our municipal elections, the county, as far as I know, isn't well, they can't do it for the federal and state elections. I suppose if they did go toward instant runoff voting, it would be for supervisor, those types of elections, but then you'd have voters voting two different ways in the same election, potentially, and that can be confusing. If we just went on our own, then we could apply it to our own elections, but it would make it, we would not be able to then hop onto their ballots and consolidate them. We would be running concurrent elections, which is very
So
difficult.
when we do those estimates of it's, usually when we jump onto a county election, what is the additional cost that they usually charge us for like a city-wide measure? What is that usually?
Let me think, well, just for example, now, if we put something on, the cost of one measure would be about $3.6 million.
And would that remain, do you believe it remain the same if we had a different system from the county? Would that increase or would it stay the same?
The cost of
If we had
that?
to bring our equipment in or whatever to be able to at least do the city portion of those during a county election?
If we did a concurrent election, I believe, maybe my staff can help, I believe our cost would be greater, so.
Come on up.
This is Arlene
We've
Taylor,
got
our
hundreds of
chief
people
of our election division.
listening on the telephone right now, so.
Hi, Arlene Taylor, Election Division Chief. If we're talking about a measure, of course, IRB doesn't apply, so the cost won't change.
Right.
Right.
But if we had to bring our equipment, in other words, if they didn't do IRV at the county, we had a special election, and we had to bring our equipment in, would we save money? Would it cost the same? Would it be more money? Like, let's say a council, a special council seat opens up, which we often have run before. Like when Mr. Ridley Thomas left for the State Assembly, I believe for his successor, we did that on county.
We would be doing a concurrent election, so they would be running their election in one way separately from us. We might run it concurrently if we had it on the same day and use the same polling places, but we would be running a separate ballot, and so we're going to be
it'd be more
increasing the
expensive
cost
than
of
it
that.
And we would tally
Right.
on our
Separately.
equipment
Okay.
and so forth, so yeah.
Okay. Let's turn a little bit to the estimates you've both had on outreach, voter outreach in this. Tell us the methodology you got to get the number that you did, some of the language issues. I don't know if we've compared, for instance, media spots or billboard ads, San Francisco versus, we've based a lot of that, I know, on the San Francisco experience.
Right, that's what
But
the
we want to
estimates
really
would
get
be
an
on.
accurate number for this, because that is a short-term cost, and it may be an ongoing for a series of years cost, that it's wonderful to have the community partners, certainly council offices and everybody else would do all theirs. We know that in our best efforts, unfortunately, our reach is much less than mass media, which is what they had to do in San Francisco, and which I assume we would have to do here. So walk us through that, and CEO can maybe give us his thoughts as well after that.
The estimates in our report were based on the San Francisco model. Now, we expected that it would probably be higher than that, because for one thing, we have 7 languages, six including English. They have 2 plus English, so that they're 3. We're a much broader area to cover. We have, the first year costs for the first election would be higher because it's new. We want to have a very aggressive voter education campaign to make sure we try to reach all those voters, and then it would probably taper off some, but it wouldn't be eliminated, because you're always going to have new voters. You're going to have possibly different venues to cover. Maybe in the future, different languages to cover. But at least the initial outlay would be higher, and we think it might even be higher than what the San Francisco model would project to, so, at least initially.
The only thing I would add is, in our report, we point out that whether IRV or vote by mail is adopted or not, if we have new equipment, we'll need to do a voter education campaign. So
that may be part of it anyway.
It may be part of it anyway. It's going to also depend on when that happens, because as you well know, at one time, spots may cost more than at other times, depending on what's going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was my understanding, for instance, in this last election, just earlier this month, that you could buy about 5 days worth of broadcast television for $250,000 in this November. People were saying they expect that to be somewhere around 8 to 10 times more. So it really does depend on the competition of. That's because there's nothing else on the ballot. It was very cheap, and a downturn in the economy didn't hurt those prices either. The city attorney, if I may ask a couple questions. Good point. Who's watched carefully by his supervisor. I think there was some criticism from folks about the RFP aspect and why, can't we wait and why can't this be put in? And my understanding there was a legal reason for that, if we might be able to put that forward.
Yes, there's actually another
attorney who specializes in that.
Specializes in contracting. We have a full staff here for you.
Thank you.
Ted Jordan.
I just want to make sure people know that,
division.
because I think that's important to hear as well from the city attorney. We've been having many of these conversations in private, but these are critical, I think, to have with the public as well. Why can't we, as some have suggested, just put in some of these, get these estimates out there? The point that I'm trying to make is I've been told when I asked the same question that many of you did, that for us to try to put those estimates down right now influences the RFP for the voting equipment. But walk us through that, and we'll see if that makes some sense to us.
The RFP process has to be fair and level for everybody. We can't have any inquiries to the providers who make this equipment get to the point where they are, in effect, shaping the RFP that they will eventually have to respond to.
So in other words, we can't communicate with the very people who might know the technology for the instant runoff voting system, because that would be some communication that would influence if they're bidding for our RFP in general.
It's not a flat ban on the communication. I mean, there can be communication, but there's a line that you can't cross, and it's not an easy place to find all the time about when your communication and the information that you get makes its way back into the RFP, and they're helping shape the specifications that they're bidding on. So if you're asking them how to what's the best way to go about doing voting machines, or what do these kinds of voting machines cost, and you're using that information to help write the RFP, then there can be the appearance that the process wasn't completely open because they've had that influence in the RFP.
Mm-hmm.
So we've urged caution, because in the end, if there's a problem in the process and a contract is awarded and one of the companies that doesn't get the contract brings a challenge, then it could cast into doubt the validity of the contract and create additional delay for the city.
Okay. All right. Thank you. For our city clerk, I know I'm jumping around to a lot of different places. One of the arguments that's been made by some colleagues that I've spoken to who aren't supportive of IRV is that at the city council level in particular, there have been a number of people who came in second, and they didn't think it was just that they were also people's then automatic second and third and fourth choices, but they weren't very well known. And that the 2 months in between for city council, where people are being introduced sometimes for the first time to the electorate, between the regular election and the runoff election, has been a time for greater voter education. Do you know how many city council members in the last 10 years or so have come in second in their initial race?
I don't know exactly how many. One comes to mind, and that was in the Council District 2 race a while back. I know there are others, but I don't have the total number offhand.
You came in first, the primary? I think our third member, Mr. Weiss, came in second. Ms. Gruhl, you were talking about
Ms.
the Gruhl
Gruhl,
Cardenas
yeah.
race?
Mhm.
Ms. Gruhl came in second then as well. I think if there's anybody else.
I don't think that's the issue, because...
I'm just bringing up their arguments.
but
Yeah.
let's take it to their logical extent.
Why don't you come forward, just because people do listen, as you know, on Ms. Goldberg. Come on forward. They listen on telephone.
If they came in second, I don't see, because they have just run your first campaign is the big one. The runoff is not nearly as big. First of all, it's shorter in time. You don't have nearly as much time, and people have already figured out, well, if I don't want this person, I want that person second. They know, the voters know what they want as their second or third choice. They just don't get asked. So I don't think that it would have changed the outcome for someone who came in second, because that person probably had a lot of people who would have given them the next level of vote, and the outcome would have been the same. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an outcome that would have been different.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's conjecture on all of our
Yeah.
parts, because you can certainly hypothetically take those away, know that there's some where people squeeze in just above a third place person because they're not very well known. In those 2 months, there is intense communication. I mean, it's in essence what some people have said at the presidential level, the Barack Obama effect, that the more time people had to get to know him, the better he did. In California, it was interesting with that campaign, having had some experience with it. On Election Day, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama tied each other, but in the 3 weeks leading up before the education. So people do over time. I mean, she beat him by like 15 points, and that's why there's a 9-point gap. But over time, some people do, with newer people, get to know them over time. So I've understood that argument. I can't disprove it, and I can't prove it. I think, but I appreciate the point that you made there.
And I think the point that's been made is, and this is a policy issue, is whether there's value in having that period between the primary and the runoff.
Right.
To focus issues, to get to know the candidates better. And if there's value in that, then how does that stack up against some of the other benefits of not having a runoff?
Absolutely. Mr. Zine, do you want to ask any questions? I have some others, but I don't want to hog the mic all.
For the city clerk, the timetable to conduct the RFP for the new voting equipment, what's the timetable?
Right. We're completing the RFP now. We're hoping to have that out in the next month or so, with bids back in the early fall.
So August, September, or July, August?
For the issuance, I would say July, August.
Okay. And the CLA, how many other cities in California have conducted elections using the system? Not that they've approved it, but how many of them have actually put it to use?
I'm sorry, the...
CAO? How many entities have
Use IRV?
have used
Actually
it?
put it into place?
As opposed to, I know some others have passed it, but I think he's asking how many have
Right.
used it.
How many are actually using it? or
San
have
San Francisco's used it. Berkeley and Oakland have passed measures to...
No, I'm talking about that past measure, I'm talking
Right.
about actually used it.
In
How many others
California,
have this?
I think it's just...
Does anybody have any other, is it San Francisco? Okay.
San Francisco.
Okay, so one
yeah.
place has used it.
Mhm.
Now, is there a distinction because it's the city and county combined? Does that have any bearing on it?
Yes, the city elections and the local, like supervisorial, those are handled by instant runoff voting, and then the state, federal elections are handled in the normal way. So people, when they do go to vote in a San Francisco election, vote two different ways.
Do they have two different systems? Do they have, in other words, a system for the instant, and then the second system, they go from booth to booth, or are they all combined? In other words, you get one,
Right, and it's several pages in the
several
ballot.
pages, but it goes
Mhm.
to one, so you've got one machine that you're using.
Right, and I believe, and then the ones that are under instant runoff voting are counted in that manner, and then the others are counted in a different manner.
So different counting, different method of.
So it's counted twice, or the technology automatically
Separates
shoots it?
Actually, I
A minute.
So San Francisco's the only.
Anybody now? Come up. I'm sorry to keep telling you to come forward, but we just have to make sure it's on the record. People, stay close.
They're reluctant.
Yeah. They had, previously, they had one vendor who developed the IRV component based from their existing voting system. So it's the same tally, simply set up differently for the IRV type ballots. They recently purchased a new voting system from a different vendor, and it's the same setup where they use the same tally system to run one set of ballots, and then it's just programmed differently for the IRV ballots.
Okay. And they're all optical scan?
Yes.
And can you, just
How
before we
much
turn
have
to
they
you...
spent on that system for San Francisco?
You know,
We've been trying to find that out.
We'll get that cost. We haven't been able to get that cost yet.
So they purchased a system, and then they purchased a second system?
Yes.
Why didn't the first system complete? Why'd they have to go to a second system?
We can ask them that specifically, but I can tell you that their first system was never formally certified. It had a number of conditional certifications from the Secretary of State,
Did they use it in an election?
and they were able to use it because of the conditional certifications. However, they had problems in their last election, and they had to count those votes manually.
Manually?
Yes.
How many thousands?
I don't know off the top of my
So the
head. I know it
system-
took them a while, but luckily, the races, did you?
Didn't draw a lot of votes.
And they were, I think they were relatively few candidates, and they were clear in terms of,
So the system did not work as expected.
they couldn't use the system.
Well, you said it had conditioned by the Secretary of State.
Previously, in the times they had used it, it had been conditionally certified each election.
How long have they been using it?
They passed the,
They passed it in 2002.
I think the first time they used it was in 2004.
2004.
2004,
And it passed,
conditional certification.
so satisfactory in 2004.
Yes.
And then subsequent to that, it didn't work as well as anticipated?
There were some issues with the vendor, I believe, and because of that, they were unable to use the equipment in the manner they had previously, which is why they had to manually count those ballots.
So they leased the system or they bought the system?
My understanding is they purchased that system. It was a system they already had, and it was modified by at that time, their vendor, to be able to conduct the IRV elections.
And how many locations, other than San Francisco, throughout the country have any type of system similar to that? Or is that it in the country?
Minneapolis, Santa Fe have both voted on it. I don't know if they...
Well, that's the point. They voted on it, they approved it. I understand the concept, but then there's the reality of actually put it to use. But to put it, so we don't have
I can ask folks.
we don't have the accurate information as
We have
far
to try to
as,
keep as clear a record as possible. I'm sorry to keep this point, but this is very important in government, so
No,
if folks
we-
have information, if they can come up.
The reliability of the
But I don't mean for everybody to rush up either, but we'll call on you. Just raise your hand if you do have answers.
okay,
to
well, I'd
things,
just like
and I will
to,
try
I'd like to
direct
deal
you.
with staff on this.
Yep.
Right.
So the issue is the reliability of this particular system and how many systems are available, how many are on the market, and how reliable are they? That's the question.
Right.
We don't have that information.
Well, there's more than one available. There are no fully certified systems for instant runoff voting in the state right now.
So if we were to purchase a system, we'd have to get some kind of conditional
We would
approval.
We're hoping to certify.
We would
Hoping to
we would
certify.
like to have a fully certified system for use.
But it doesn't exist at this point.
That's right. Not today, right?
That's what I'm asking.
That's correct.
Okay. The other question comes in matching funds. How does this process work with matching funds? Is there any impact on that with matching funds?
Is this the ethics?
Let's ask the Ethics Commission to come
question?
forward. We're going to get to that too, but let's get up there. Since Los Angeles election laws are possibly the most complex already, including our financing
More
stuff,
complex.
let's dig down on this one because it's not an inconsequential question. Mr. Simon?
None of them are inconsequential.
None of them.
Democracy in action. Okay.
Good afternoon. Heather Holt with the Ethics Commission. It could have a significant effect on the matching funds program, particularly with regard to how it relates to additional funds that are provided to candidates who participate in the program and are either opposed by an independent expenditure or are running against someone who is favored by an independent expenditure. Currently, we provide additional matching funds to those candidates. However, that's only in a general, in a runoff. There are a number of policy considerations that surround that, and the city made the decision that it's a far easier task to determine who is opposed and who is favored by an expenditure when there are only two people in a race. So this is something that would need to be addressed if we are going to provide the same kind of additional funding in a one-election system. That also, in turn, could affect the amount of funds that are in the Public Matching Funds Trust Fund, particularly with regard to whether the funding is sufficient at current levels.
So if you have an open seat, which we now have that situation take place because of term limits, and you had 10 or 12 or 15 candidates, and that threshold was met, then you'd have to provide that funding to 10 or 15 individual candidates.
If that is the system that the city decides to pursue or to continue in an
That's the
IRV
system now.
system.
That's the system
That's the system now, but only in a general.
Right.
Yes.
So in the primary, there is still funding, matching funds at a
Yes.
certain threshold of $25,000.
That's correct. We just don't provide additional matching funds in a primary as a result of independent expenditures in a particular race.
But other than the independent expenditures,
Yes.
still that. Okay.
Yes, we still do.
So that would have to then be reviewed by the ethics. Have you folks discussed that at all?
The commission has not had an opportunity to weigh in on that. They would definitely need to and want to, if IRV is placed on the ballot, provide specific recommendations for how that system should look.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Another issue that was brought up by our city clerk, is your belief right now that the technology that we probably, without, again, being careful not to say too much about anything with the RFP, but the technology that you have looked at in a cursory way out there, that we probably would be looking at an optical and paper-based system for IRV in the near term?
And most likely, it would be, if we were going to go off on our own, it would be a paper-based, or could be a paper-based system, which also has, we're talking about large paper ballots.
Walk everybody through what you walked me through in terms of what that would do for cost and weight and personnel and all of that.
Right. With paper ballots, so right now, if you're familiar with the cards that we use now, what we do is all of the supplies go out with our poll workers. So if we're having larger paper ballots, there are issues in weight and getting those out to the polls and transporting them. If it's a longer ballot, it could be more than one sheet, as opposed to the 312 ballot that we use now, where you can put any number of things. We've never run out of space on one of those. So in terms of getting supplies out, it's going to be more of a burden on our poll workers, and just the deployment of that is something to consider. We add more and more responsibilities to our poll workers, and now, with the systems that we have now, they also take out we have large equipment, we have the big ballot, the tubs, the supply tubs, and so we're adding more and more to what they have to take out and bring back as well. So.
Okay. See if there's something else I wanted to ask about. Couple things I'll just say in general. I mean, one, in looking at this, I know that there's a hurry to do it fast. I think there's a belief to do it right, and for me, that's the difficult question for me personally. Not if, but when. And I want to be very clear that when answer for me has nothing to do about putting it on a shelf and letting it rot there. Never has been for me. It hasn't been. We've been actually pushing to get these reports. We've gotten them. They're very complicated issues, I think, that we haven't even gone into as deeply as we probably need to today, but we've put out there. My experience with clean money at the state level was very informative, too, as a big proponent of clean money here. That was kind of rushed on the ballot and failed pretty miserably. And people were saying the same argument. It's going to be a high turnout year as opposed to a smaller electorate where you can really educate them and spend some time with them. There's an assumption. I mean, when you have higher turnout, there's people who vote less often. They're also less focused in general on elections. They come out because something or someone inspires them to do so. It's a presidential election. So I don't think that there will be less noise in November and a greater opportunity necessarily for us to take a very complex thing to the people. I think it'll be more difficult. But I just will agree to disagree with some of my friends who are also for this, who keep pushing for November as the best date because there's higher turnout. I don't think it necessarily gets us the outcome that we all agree we would like to see. But I'm not personally going to hold up the ability of the council to talk about this, as I said on Friday, about the timing piece. I mean, there's two thresholds for this to get there. There's three thresholds, and I'll put all three out there. One is to convince a majority of the council to do this. Two is to try to agree on when that is. And three is to make sure this mayor signs that. And I know I haven't heard anybody in here, and I will respect private communications, but I think that making sure the mayor would sign this is a very important part of this debate moving forward, I want to be respectful of time too. It's not just about IRV, and it never has been in this. And I think we can't take them separately. It's also looking at vote by mail, which to me is critical. And I personally have the prejudice of thinking this is a greater boost to IRV. Does a good thing for democracy and the choices that are out there. The evidence I've looked at is, yes, there's some higher participation, but not to the level I believe that I've seen with the vote by mail. Again, they're not mutually exclusive. But for me, the part of getting more voters to vote, when I've looked at Oregon and other places, getting a ballot physically at home is a much better way of boosting our numbers than any other innovations. They may act again in concert, so I'm not saying either or. But in terms of what we would need to do, if we put IRV on the ballot in November, if we did it in March, if we waited, a year, whatever the different options are, what does that do to our ability to look at, vote by mail reform as you outlined in your report as well?
Well, in either case, either with an IRV election or a vote by mail centered election, we would require an amendment to the charter and amendments to our election code. So I think the discussion before had been, if we're going to consider these, consider them both. If we're going to do one or the other, as you said, that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. In a vote by mail centered election, what that would do is we would have everybody would receive a vote by mail ballot, but we would supplement that by having about 100 different voting centers throughout the city, strategically located, so that if somebody wanted to go to a polling place and vote, they could go and do that, get assistance by people who are staffing those centers. And again, if we implemented IRV with something like that, then that's a matter of the tally. Now with the vote by mail centered elections, that's predicated on having electronic voting. So in one sense, it might actually facilitate instant runoff voting with those electronic voting machines. But again, we're talking about systems that aren't fully certified in the state of California. So whether we could actually go to implement something like that is going to depend on what's finally certified. But again, if we're going out with an RFP, we're looking at all those different options, and we're going to see what we get back.
So the RFP includes both of those aspects, the
It does.
VDM and the IRV stuff.
That's correct.
I mean, in an ideal world, we would be doing this with that information before us. Now, it's not your fault as advocates that we don't have that yet, but we don't. And again, I think it would be my preference then to move this forward to council without recommendation on placing something on November. But I'll leave that up to the members to vote their conscience and to vote and possibly put it on for November. So I want to be very clear, I'm not closing that possibility off. It's my gut and my personal opinion that when it isn't as crowded and as loud a ballot as it will be this November, there's a better chance of actually spending the time not only to educate folks, but as we look at the critical folks who killed clean money and other things, the editorial boards and others, that the questions that they're going to ask, which we kind of sometimes dismiss in our fervor to get this system on, which I agree is going to be a great innovation when and if we can do that, that we still don't have before us today. And that's the implementation of how this would actually work day to day. We've seen in Florida, we've seen even in this state, what happens when we have bad equipment with great ideas behind them. And that's what has been the sticking point for me, and I wanted to state that very clearly. So it would be my recommendation to ask the city clerk and the CAO to continue to get us that information and those numbers. I'm not satisfied with what we have yet on that, but to forward to the council for their consideration on Friday. Although I think there was a request for us to put it off till Tuesday, but I don't want to. I think the Friday date's been put out to a lot of people, so it may be best to keep with that this Friday to consider, when to put that on the ballot if the council is ready to do so. Mr. Zine, do you have any?
I support it. The concern I have is that we don't have answers to a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So we go to the council on Friday, we discuss it, we have a debate for 2 hours, we come up with the same resolution, we don't have answers to questions, and then you're sent back to get the answers, whether it's November or March or whenever, we still don't have those answers. So we move it forward, and it's symbolic that we support the concept, but we don't have all the tools that are necessary to implement. And then there's the question of how much it's going to cost, and where does that money come from on a budget that is very tight, and we're talking about layoffs and furloughs. And that's the other consideration, is are we doing justice to this by pushing it through without having the questions to those answers? the answers to those questions.
What I also will look at on Friday, and the costs aren't going to be for this year because we're talking about it in a future year. I mean, there may be incremental costs, obviously, on putting on the ballot. That's a $200,000 cost. But for me, I will have a very detailed list on Friday of the specific things that I'd like to get as exacting numbers as we can estimate, and I'll try to work through some of the methodology on that. Like, what does it mean in 7 languages? It's not, you don't just do it times 7 because it's a lot cheaper in many of the languages to reach out in those ethnic presses. But to be able to do that, because my gut is, and I'm not lobbying individual members on this. I'm actually asked. I've been said nothing but positive things about IRV. But with individual members, they may be asking those numbers, and I want to provide as much of that as possible. So even between now and then, on Friday, if we can get some of those answers, when we have you before a table there in council, I'd like the members to get as much of the depth of that answer. So if they do feel good moving towards November, we can do that.
And then we still have the question about ethics and the matching funds. There's a lot of holes that exist, and that's what I'm trying to decide.
Capacity-wise, city attorney's office is able. Do they believe if there is a willingness to do this for November? Do you believe that the changes in administrative code, any charter changes that would have to be, the charter ones we'd have to put on the ballot, the administrative code obviously we can do afterwards, that you can meet the deadlines to put this on November ballot?
We would work hard to do so, but we would need some guidance from the council as to the specific features of what you want to put on the ballot. A request to just put instant runoff voting on the ballot isn't sufficient for us to know exactly what you would want.
Right.
We would need, there's a San Francisco model out there, that's maybe a starting point, but there are various sort of policy questions along the way about how to treat different types of ballots, tie votes, write-in votes, things like that, that we would need some guidance.
And I assume, and Ms. Field, this is up your alley as well, and there's nobody here from the school district as well, but you would need some pretty intimate direction for the other elections that we oversee as a city.
Yeah, and that's, the school districts are covered, the LAUSD is covered in our charter, and we're authorized to govern their elections through the Constitution. And we'd be clear in any ballot measure we put forward that it would affect LAUSD elections as well, and that would be submitted to the entire LAUSD. LACCD we conduct by contract, and there'd be a consolidation onto our election.
And LACCD has taken an official position for this for November? Because I want to make sure, because that's another body to come on forward. Sorry, don't worry.
I'm so sorry. Yes, a majority of our board supports IRV, and I might add that our understanding is that under the state, I guess, education code, or I'm not sure which code, we automatically go with the city election.
Right.
So whatever the city does, we do.
But you didn't take, but just to be clear, too, you haven't taken a formal adoption of
Not of this, we did.
November or?
Oh, no, not in terms of timing. We did pass a resolution after our runoff of about a year ago, which people have referred to with the 6%.
the poster child.
Yes, Jose Huizar and his wife voted.
Yes.
After that, we did pass a resolution asking our staff to begin to investigate options for improving turnout, and this, of course, came to the top of the list.
Absolutely, okay. And have we had any communication from LAUSD at all on this?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay.
I still have some questions regarding 5 months between now and November. This is almost the end of June. We're talking about 5 months to put this on the ballot with those questions that haven't been answered. When do those questions get answered? When do we find a system that's going to be certified by the state? I mean, when do these issues get resolved? We go to council, council says, yeah, unanimously, we like the idea, but we have all these unanswered questions. So in the next 5 months, are we going to get those answers and then push something on the ballot and hopefully keep our fingers crossed it'll work?
Well, it's hard to say when we're going to know about the certified systems. What I think we'll get some more information through this RFP process, certainly about the cost, but also just where these different vendors are in that certification process and what they're anticipating. But at this point, and I couldn't say whether we'll have all the answers in the next few months. We may have more of them, but I'm not sure that we're going to have all of them.
So if the council directs this to go on the November ballot, and we don't have all the answers, we implement something, the voters approve it, and that would take effect.
Well, I think that's why it's important to be very clear about under what conditions this would apply. For example, we had discussed about doing it on a pilot project, on a pilot basis, maybe in a special election, but I think it would have to be very clearly defined as to how that's going to apply, under what conditions would we use it if we're going to be doing it on a pilot basis instead of rolling it out completely. And keep in mind, too, that when we have a new election system is not going to be in place for the 2009 elections, the earliest we're talking about is 2011, and maybe a little bit earlier if there's a special election, but we're talking about full implementation of any new election system in 2011.
So there would be time to implement, and then the CAO's recommendation is to continue the matter until after the clerk has released the RFP. So the CAO's recommendation is to continue it.
Yeah, and I believe that's so that we can have some additional cost information for the council to consider. We'll have a little bit more information about what kinds of systems are out there,
But
and
if we direct this to go to the council on Friday, we're going against the CAO's recommendation, and we don't have answers to those questions.
I mean, yeah, and just to get to that point, let me cut to the heart of this. I think for a lot of the advocates, they say, do it now, get it on November, because the underlying feeling I get from some is if you don't do it now, we don't believe it's going to get done. But I bet the advocates would admit, as I would, if we had full information, we'd all be doing this better. If we had it today, we would make a better decision today with all that full information. I want to be very clear, asking for full information and getting these details is not pushing it off to kill it. And when people are asking, why hasn't this been done, it's because even in a 2-hour conversation here, in each one, there are things we really need to dig down into. And I give you my word that as long as I chair this committee, as long as I'm president of this council, or as in my capacity as a council member, I will continue to bird dog this and to see it through. But I'm not going to do it personally until I feel confident that we have those numbers, especially when we're talking about a 2011 vote. Now, privately, a lot of the people who have endorsed this have also talked to me, because I've called them, I've talked to them, and they're like, we're absolutely for this in concept, as I am. But then I say, so do you want it in November? For sure. Is this really critical to you right now? How strongly do you feel? They can't often get past the second or third paragraph of that. They say, we want to explore that with you. I don't know. And to me, I want to have the strongest possible coalition. So when we go to an LA Times, when we go to the voters, et cetera, we don't fall flat. So I say that just as something to reassure people, because I know everybody wants to run out of here with a victory. We got it, and it's on November. The worst possible thing is we get it through, don't know what we're doing, or we don't even get it through at all. And so for whatever little political device, it's kind of like being a good spouse or a good partner, people say, is learning to admit you're wrong. I'll be the first to admit I'm wrong. If my colleagues think November is right and it's a better election and that we should go and we don't need the answers to these questions. And I'm not closing off that possibility. I'm continuing that process along. But if some of them agree with me, having experience in this realm too, of running a lot of initiatives, doing a lot of government reform things, as well as trying to get a victory, I think that many of them may agree. And I hope that you would too, and not get disheartened and be like, oh, that's City Hall again. We're pretty clear about what we're digging into. The city clerk and the CEO have done a lot of work on this. And in their private conversations with me are not trying to kill this. They're trying to give us the best options as policymakers, period. So I really appreciate the work that's been put out there, but I also want to say that as clearly as I can, because I think people come in, and that's what the kind of the feeling behind the push right now is, just get it done, we'll figure that out later. We don't have that luxury. We want to do things right.
Well, the problem is, we have a committee process. We iron this out in committee. We spend 2, 3, 4, or 5 hours, whatever it takes. We go to the council where we have agendas where people come up and testify. We leave council, if this goes on Friday, we're going to leave council on Friday with the same unanswered questions that we're leaving now. And then the council members are going to say, send it back to committee to have it heard and get it resolved. We're not going to get it resolved by Friday. We don't have the answers by Friday. So I don't understand, and it's not stalling anything, it's if you don't have the tools, you're not going to be able to finish it. We don't have the tools to finish it because that information hasn't been brought forward. Ethics hasn't even looked into it. What do we do about that? So we sent something forward for whatever reason, political expediency, and they're going to look at us and say, you don't have a finished product. You got an unbaked cake you're bringing to us, put it back in the oven and cook it, and then bring it to us. That's my concern, is what are we going to accomplish in council on Friday that we
Well, I
haven't
want to give the
accomplished
courtesy
here?
to the advocates. I mean, more than a courtesy. I want them, they've asked for that debate, and I'm going to give that to them on Friday. I'm not
That's what the committee's for.
prejudging where we're going to get to, but, I mean, if you want to vote to hold it, we can,
Well, what I'm
kind of
saying
forward
is that I'd like to support it. I do support the concept, but you support a concept where you have many unanswered questions.
Correct.
And we send it to council on Friday. We're going to have a long debate, and we're not going to resolve anything that we haven't been able to resolve here because those questions remain unanswered. Do we have a system that works? Do we have the funding? Do we have all the particulars? Do we have the ethics involved? No, none of that.
Well, let me put on my hat as a political organizer. I think it'll be helpful for the advocates to hear the entire council, or many more of them, push to articulate where they're at, because I think that'll help organize getting this on the ballot, whether it's for Friday in some extremely successful way off the bat, or long-term. Those of you who've been a part of Clean Money know this. It is not a battle that's won overnight. It's something that is about the iterations of getting there, and I think that you need to hear from more than the 2 or 3 folks you've been meeting with a lot who have said yes. So
Again, I'll emphasize that I support the concept, and I think it's our responsibility to take something to the full council, to our colleagues, that has the answers to the questions, and not just go through the same questions and the same answers that aren't coming forward, to tell people that we support something. I think all the council members would be willing to say it's a great concept, we like it. How do we make it work? How do we get a system that's going to work when we don't have a system that works? All those questions, I just see us going in Friday and doing this a 2-hour discussion and walking away saying, get the work done, clerk, get the work done, CLA, CAO, and come back in 6 months. I mean, I wish I could give you all the answers.
And I
don't have
appreciate
them.
that very much, Mr. Zine. I think I agree with you, but I also think that the debate will be enriched by hearing from our colleagues any things that we've missed, and if they need to send them with more information. This is an important enough change to the heart of our democracy that more than committee should comment on it for this, at this moment. They may not send it on to the ballot right now, but let's have them be part of the
There's
conversation.
been 4 council members who have spoken. 2 came to this committee and 2 are on this committee. And we have another committee member who's not here. That would have been 5 out of the 15. So I think the attitude would be supportive. And I'm not unwilling to say send it forward to council on Friday. I'm just a practical individual to say, what are we going to resolve in council Friday other than debating this one more time and not getting answers? That's my issue.
Appreciate it.
So I will agree with you
No.
to send it forward, and we'll debate it again on Friday. Again, we'll come with the same unanswered questions that we have today. I'm just practical, common sense.
Thank you, Mr. Common Sense. And thank you all very much for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you on Friday in the full council, and organize. We'll see you then. Thank you.